Hey, how's it going? It's your boy, Mobalytics, Challenger Coach here to bring you the 10.9 High-ELO tier list. So without any more delays, let's get right into it. For the top lane, our starting S tier roster will be Renekton, Wukong, Maokai, Fiora, and in God tier we have Aatrox and Jax. For our changes, we got Quinn going from off the list to B tier, post buff to the Sanguini Blade, and then also her Q, although that didn't really impact it too much. Mostly the Sanguini Blade first item has been really good for her, and she's a fantastic counter to Renekton, who is really popular in this bracket. Kayn surprisingly is going to go from off the list to B tier, as the buffs he received to his Q were actually really good for his laning phase, and he is a viable top laner for a little bit, although Riot is potentially nerfing Ross for him, so we'll see how it goes. Now for the highlights. Renekton is dethroned in the God tier this patch by the Inner City Demon Aatrox. Roughly a 54% win rate, and he's the most popular top laner in High-ELO with an 11% pick rate, but still barely gets any bans, which is just fantastic for him. Now, for those who look into these kind of stats, especially in High-ELO, the lack of ban rate can actually be a sign against a champion. But in this particular case, it happens to be that not a lot of people feel that threatened by Aatrox because there's a lot of supposed counter picks that people are just going to leave Aatrox up and then pick those into him. Then the funny thing about it is they kind of just lose anyways, because Aatrox is a champion who is just one of the best 1v2 top laners in the meta. He's extremely good at just lifesteal tanking. It's very similar to things like Vladimir or Darius, but he actually has the mobility to just kite people out and actually win 1v2s consistently. He does well into most meta matchups, including stuff he's supposed to lose to, like Renekton. Renekton is considered a counter pick to Aatrox in the early game, but in terms of the stats, he actually just kind of outscales the matchup anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. He does struggle into things like Fiora, Maokai, and in particular also Camille a little bit, so avoid those matchups if you plan on picking Aatrox. Next up, we got the GOAT God Ornn going from B tier to A tier with a 51.5% win rate, but an 8% pick rate, which is actually massive in High-ELO. He's making a slight comeback on this particular patch, and he's really popular. Though initially the Bork meta and Death Dance abusers kind of knocked down tanks in general in the top lane, especially in High-ELO, but they have been rising up a lot lately, as many of them remembered the age-old wisdom of tank players. When in doubt, Bramble Vest, Toppies, and then Bomby Cinder. Alright, that's all you really need to be a tank player in the top lane right now. You build those 3 items and you're pretty much good to go against any AD matchup. Try it out with the Ornn when needed, especially against things like Aatrox. It doesn't really matter, almost every top laner is abusing Bork and Conqueror. And if you're able to do this, get through the laning phase okay, you're gonna outscale all of these bruiser players. So that's why Ornn and Maokai in particular are doing so well right now. Last up for the top lane, we actually have Tryndamere going from B tier to A tier with a 59% win rate, a 3% pick rate, and a ban rate of 6%. Now, these numbers might look a little bit insane, but you have to remember, in Masters Plus, where we're taking the data from, the sample size is a lot smaller, so win rates can be inflated on lower pick rate champions, especially like Tryndamere, who are very often one-tricked. But Tryndamere in general has been doing a lot better recently, and that's because a lot of his good matchups have become even more popular. Things like Aatrox, Ornn, Darius, Mordekaiser, Aurelia, and he's even a Godslayer in Jax, and all of these champions have just been increasing in popularity lately, giving him a lot easier time during the laning phase, which of course, since it's solo queue, we all know that that's pretty much the most important part of the game. He does, on the other hand, struggle into stuff like Malphite, Renekton, Shen, things that can just kind of stalemate the lane or just beat him outright because Renekton trading pattern is just hilariously imbalanced. But the good thing about Tryndamere is in these matchups, he can just always opt to outfarm them. He can do things like proxy or just take jungle monsters way more efficiently than any of those champions can, and then just overpower them with items and right clicking. He's also very good at solo taking over games because of this tactic. So when in doubt on Tryndamere, spin, right click, and then farm the jungle monsters. That's how you're gonna get the lead, that's how you're gonna get the LP. In the Mighty Jungle, our S tier roster is going to be Kayn, Elise, Echo, Rek'Sai, Rengar, and in God tier we've got Lead Singer and Graves. Changes to the list will include Karthus going from S tier / God tier all the way down to A tier. People laughed at me saying that movement speed nerf was actually going to make a difference, and it did. It dropped him from a 58% win rate and 9% pick rate and 40% ban rate to a 54% win rate, 6% pick rate, and a 29% ban rate. It was actually massive. Our next change is going to be to J4 / J-Money going from A tier to B tier. He's kind of mediocre at everything right now. He's not bad, but you know, he's just okay, which is why he's really good in B tier. He's got around a 50% win rate, a 7% pick rate, but only a 1% ban rate. Then we have the Wukong nerfs, who actually hurt him a lot in the jungle, especially in High-ELO, where he was never really good at the jungle in this particular bracket. So he's going to go from A tier to B tier, as he dropped to a 52% win rate and only a 2% pick rate. So he's not all that amazing. Poppy, although she is kind of a viable jungler into certain matchups, we're going to shout around her as her pick rate is well below 1%, which is our normal cutoff for High-ELO. Then we have Sylas jungle. he's actually an abomination in solo queue. 45% win rate, but a 5% pick rate. Like, what are people doing? So he got shut around as well. Even though he's a popular jungler, pros like to play him, the results are not there. But you know what champion used to be bad and is now in S tier? Yeah, that's right, it's Kayn. He went from B tier to S tier after his insane amount of buffs. He currently holds a 56% win rate, a 9% pick rate, and a 9% ban rate, instead of his old 10.8 stats, which were 52% win rate, 2% pick rate, and a 0.6% ban rate. No one cared about that champion before. He's actually, though, after the buffs, able to impact the early game with ganks thanks to the W slow being higher, and he can even skirmish thanks to his Q being up more often. Not to mention, this allows him to get his form even faster because he can actually fight people in the early game and it's not considered trolling. Crazy how he can actually do what a jungler is supposed to do now instead of being useless for 10 to 12 minutes. And, you know, maybe if he can't gank, at least he can clear a lot faster now. Plus, because both of his forms are currently viable, he's extremely versatile as a champion. Riot really wanted this guy to be viable. He got buff after buff after buff, and I think this one was the one that did the trick because he's S tier pretty much everywhere. This one's going to look a little bit odd, but we're actually going to move Xin Zhao from B tier to A tier as he currently holds a 60% win rate, but only a 2% pick rate. Now again, obviously the win rate's inflated because the pick rate's really low and because of sample size, but he's been doing so much better lately. And one of it has to do with the fact that he has two viable setups. One, Halo Blaze, which is the most popular and the most standard, but also Phase Rush has been seeing a lot more play recently into certain matchups like versus Olaf, and it's growing in popularity. I know it is kind of strange though that such an early game focused jungler is doing so well lately in a kind of slightly farm heavy meta, but this is kind of very similar to how Olaf works. He can just run the early game over so that the fact that other people are out farming him barely matters. He just gets those scuttle crabs, he gets the Herald, he takes down turret plates, and he grabs dragons, and then hopefully, you know, the game doesn't actually go to teamfight to late game because he's terrible there. But still, he's winning a lot if your early game is strong right now. Last up for the jungle section, we actually have Lee Singa going from S tier to God tier. He has a 54% win rate, a 23% pick rate, and a 17% ban rate. He is the second most popular jungler in High-ELO, barely surpassed by Graves only on this patch. Once Karthus took a massive dive from God status, someone needed to ascend, and who better than the Godfist himself, who did struggle a little bit versus Karthus as it was common for him to get outscaled in this popular matchup. I mean, sure, sometimes Lee Sin kind of ran over the early game versus Karthus, and other times he didn't and just got outscaled, which is kind of a shame. But now with Karthus kind of out of the way, the Godfist himself can barely be stopped during the early game, and his dueling power with Conqueror and playmaking potential with his ultimate is just way too much to handle, especially in solo queue where everyone just wants to fight all the time. He's even got a new setup where you're actually going to go Edge of Night second when snowballing. It's a viable option, although of course his standard build is to go Black Cleaver second, but keep this in mind when picking up Lee Sin. If you're snowballing and you're looking to make some big hyphy plays, then Edge of Night second can be the thing that lets you do that. Starting up in the mid lane, our S tier roster will be Castlewin, Sylas, Zoe, LeBlanc, Cassio, and in God tier we've got Syndra and Katarina. First up for changes, we've got Vladimir going from A tier to B tier. He roughly has a 51% win rate and a 4% pick rate, but he doesn't really suit this roam heavy meta and doesn't really apply enough lane pressure or have wave clear in the early game, kind of like other control mages, so he's a lot better in top lane currently where he actually gets time to scale. Cassio will also drop down from S tier to A tier with a 55% win rate, a 5% pick rate, and a 10% ban rate. She's A+ for sure right now, but she is also taking a hit because mid lane in general has kind of devolved into you just kind of roam and help your jungler. It's very similar as to why Vlad isn't doing very well in the mid lane. She doesn't super suit this style of play, and she doesn't offer that much in the early game. Although it's way more than what Vlad does, because at least when Cassio gets tier, she can still do stuff and bully lane, and she does have decent wave clear at that point in time, while Vlad really doesn't. Then we've got Zed going from A tier to B tier with a 51% win rate and a 5% pick rate. Unfortunately for Zed, with the increase in tank junglers and things like Grave, who he struggles versus, or even enchanters like Lulu, it's caused Zed to lose a lot of kill targets, and as an AD assassin who can't really randomly shove the lane and roam to a random wave or look to kill the jungler as often as the other ones, he is going to suffer more than things like Talon and Kiana. Renekton is also going to go from B tier to off the list into the Shadow Realm, as he's more of a situational pick that can be used as an anti-assassin more so than an actual mid laner. Although an anti-assassin pick that's actually a mid laner is Lissandra, who went from B tier to A tier post buffs and currently holds a 55% win rate and a 4% pick rate. The buffs are actually just so good for her, and she is a fantastic counter to heavy melee roam metas, which is exactly what we're in right now. You're just going to pick a melee assassin and you're going to roam to bot lane and you're gonna hope that you tilt the bot lane more than they do. But with Lissandra, she's not gonna die, she can control those roams, and she can even lock them down during skirmishes and fights to get some free kills. The other thing that's making her a lot stronger in solo queue than normal is, instead of going the boring aftershock method, you're now going to go electrocute, which allows Lissandra to bully lane more often, it allows her to get her ult up more often, and it allows her to get solo kills and impact skirmishes way better than what aftershock did. Also, in terms of her build, there is kind of a debate between Ludens and Protobelt. Statistically, they're pretty much the same, so if you like using Protobelt to close the gap and get a little bit more burst early game, go for that. If you like going Ludens into Zhonya's and then grabbing a death cap for more burst or damage in team fights, then you can do that too. Also, quick update, in terms of level maxing, this version of Lissandra likes W max second over E. As is very common in mid lane right now, like I just mentioned, it's all about the assassins and it's all about the anti-assassins. And Galio in particular I want to highlight because he is one of the closest champions to reaching S tier with a 58% win rate and a 6% pick rate. He is very similar to Lissandra in a sense because he outputs a lot of anti-roam pressure and can deny assassins from snowballing because he's so tanky and has so much CC, but for whatever reason can still one-shot people. I mean, his damage is just nuts. Even non-assassin melee champions will struggle to deal with Galio damage. It's pretty crazy. He's one of the best champions though, and this is why he's doing so well. He's one of the best champions at working with his jungler. All you do on Galio to win games is you're going to push your lane with every single Q, and sometimes you can tag the other person if you can, but just push the wave, and then you go help your jungler do whatever they want. If you need to ult them, ult them. If you don't need to, it's fine. Go contest scuttles, make sure they don't suicide for them, and you're going to win some pretty easy games as Galio. And now, last up, this might surprise you, but Yasuo is the closest champion to reaching S tier in the mid lane High-ELO right now. He currently holds a 56% win rate, a 7% pick rate, but a 22% ban rate. If he actually maintains these stats, he's likely to make it and potentially Galio as well. Now, the reason he's doing so well lately though is all the new item techs that he have really helping him out. He's got a lot of extra options. You know, versus tanks or bruisers in the mid lane, he can grab a Bork early. He's got Death Dance 3rd or 4th to help him survive during the teamfight phase, and he can even go Shiv if he's snowballing and really wants that extra wave clear and damage. He's got a lot of utility from all these new item setups that people have been using on him lately. Not to mention, as per usual, he is a very snowball heavy laner, and with so many champions in the meta that can provide knockups for him, even outside the jungle, you got a lot of supports. You got things like Galio support coming in that can help out. You got Braum, you got Alistar. You got even Zac support or Zac jungle, you got Gragas jungle, you got so many things that can just make it so that Yasuo can succeed. Even some of the support picks really help him out, like Lulu for example, or even a Yuumi. A Yuumi Yasuo, if they're super fed, is really difficult to deal with. Probably the only way to make him not feed. Moving down the bot lane, our starting S tier roster will be Aphelios, Kai'Sa, Kalista, Vayne, and in God tier we've got the Misfortune Ezreal combo and then also Varus. For the changes, we moved Xayah down from A tier to B tier as she only really holds a 51.5% win rate, but a 5% pick rate, which is respectable, but it's still kind of low. And that includes the stats where she's paired with Rakan, where she's significantly worse without him currently, so if you rank her by herself, she's probably B tier. As for some more important changes though, we've got Vayne going from A tier to S tier. She currently holds a 55.5% win rate, an 11% pick rate, and a 5% ban rate. She's actually just a monster right now, which might throw some people off. But then you remember that the meta is mostly based around melee champions who need to die. And you need that kind of heavy single target DPS to get through things like Ornn or Maokai, or even bruisers who get incredibly fed. Vayne is one of the only champions who can actually DPS them down. Now, normally she actually struggles in lane, but not in the current bot lane meta because she has a lot of enchanters to help her get through the laning phase, things like Lulu for example, and she's even got some really popular AD matchups that she actually wins. Kai'Sa's really popular, Kalista's really popular, and most notably, Ezreal's the most popular AD in the game, and she does extremely well into these matchups and can easily outscale them. So, although it pains me to actually say that Vayne's really good, she's really good. So if I'm saying that, she's definitely going to be strong in the meta. Our next change is actually going to be Aphelios going from A tier to S tier. He's still one of the most popular AD carries in the game with the 21% pick rate and a 15% ban rate. Post nerfs, I mean, he did get hit by some nerfs and they're pretty substantial and it did hurt his win rate, but it's not big enough to stop this abomination of a champion. 200 years in the hyperbolic time chamber is just not enough to be stopped by this level of nerfs. The funny thing about Aphelios though is this isn't even close to his final form. He is much weaker than he was in the past, but he's still this strong, and what really happened was the community ended up learning Aphelios and how to completely abuse him at the same rate that Riot was nerfing him. So even though Riot kept throwing nerf after nerf after nerf, it didn't really matter because the community just kept getting better at him. optimizing his items, actually knowing how to use his weapon switching, actually getting some combos in on him, abusing the fact that turret procs his secondary weapon. That mechanic is just so absurd, by the way. It's just funny that he's going to maintain S tier because people are learning to get better at him at the same rate that Riot is nerfing him. That means that last up for the AD carry list, we actually have a little bit of an unconventional pick, and that will be Taliyah going from off the list to B tier. We added her in onto the list as a viable AP mage option. Although I should mention when playing her, you do need a particular style of support. You can't really pair her with enchanter supports or anything that's too passive. You really want to pair her with engaged supports, things like Nautilus, Leona, Thresh, stuff like that, or even Alistar is fine. That can actually set up her combo very easily. If she does that, she's fantastic versus a mobile AD carries like Aphelios or Misfortune. She is particularly good into Aphelios because he has terrible base stats and terrible base MR. But she can also do well into things like Kai'Sa and Kalista, who end up kind of dashing through her rocks and giving her some extra damage, or even Varus, although that matchup's slightly harder if he goes lethality. So just keep those things in mind with Taliyah. Remember, you want to pick her with an engaged support, she's not really that blind pickable, and she's really good into a mobile ADCs, although she can do well into ones that use dashes, just avoid things like Ezreal. Lastly, for the support section, our S tier roster is going to be Senna, Lulu, Yuumi, Nautilus, and in God tier, we've got Bard and Thresh. First up for the list, we actually have Nautilus going from A tier to S tier. His win rate spiked a lot on this patch, going to a 53.5% win rate, a 12% pick rate, and an 18% ban rate. This is a lot to do though with the support matchups. Things like Yuumi, Thresh, Lulu, and even Karma got way more popular recently, and he does extremely well on these champions, which has helped him out a lot. Plus, he's been kind of high A tier for a while now, so he still has his normal strengths, which is amazing engage potential and amazing roaming and playmaking potential while being tankier than the other hook supports, because things like Thresh, although he is somewhat tanky, is not the same level of tankiness as a Nautilus. Blitzcrank, same thing. Pyke, the opposite of tanky. Which kind of makes it so that Nautilus is the most forgiving of the hook champions, which is why he's actually really easy to play and very, very, very strong. Next up for our highlights, we got Zilean moving from B tier to A tier with a 54% win rate and a 4% pick rate. It's actually kind of scary how good this champion is, and no one likes playing him. For good reason, but still. He's one of the best scaling supports in the game as he's so great at denying divers and assassins, and my favorite part of Zilean is he can turn a teammate face checking and getting caught into a legitimate engage, which is a powerful, powerful tool in solo queue. One of the nice things about him too is he's extremely good when paired with hyper carries like Aphelios, for example. Those two, Aphelios and Zilean, if they get out of the laning phase okay, it's pretty much a GG and you're gonna win that game. There's also kind of a new combo with Senna and Zilean that's been quite popular as a duo queue recently. It's very similar to the fasting Zenith strats where you're actually gonna give Zilean the farm, and that allows him to get items a little bit faster for more utility. But the fact that these two provide all the utility a team could ever need is a fantastic ball lane combo. And if a single bomb lands or a single snare lands, they can even kill someone. But I want to highlight an even stronger enchanted support on this patch, and that's Lulu, who goes with a 57% win rate, a 12% pick rate, and a 7% ban rate, and she is the closest support to ascend into God tier right now. One of the reasons for that is statistically she only has one losing matchup in High-ELO, and that's to Sona because she gets outscaled, and that's Blitzcrank because she gets hooked and just died, and then also very slightly to Zyra as Lulu has very bad base MR and can be bullied out by burst champions like Zyra. But outside of those three, she has positive win rates versus everything else. Now, this doesn't mean that she actually wins lane versus all those other champions. It just means that on average she just ends up outscaling them anyways regardless of what happened during the laning phase, which is currently one of her main strengths. She's just so good with hyper carry ball laners, things like Vayne, Aphelios in particular, and even things like AD Varus or Kog'Maw are also extremely good. She has a lot of options to help herself get carried. But more importantly, she's one of the best anti-dive supports, which is the only way to make AD carry worth picking at the moment, which is why she's so strong. She just unleashes the AD carry role's potential to be actually useful. They're not going to die instantly, they're going to have the mobility to kite, and they're going to output an absurd amount of DPS. And you know what? Even if that fails, even if your AD carry lets you down, which of course that's going to happen sometimes, it's fine because you can just buff up that Graves jungle that's been farming all game, you can buff up that melee diver mid laner or top laner and it'll be fine. As long as there's one person playing a carry champion on your team and you're Lulu, you can probably win that game. That's all I got though, so thanks everyone for watching our 10.9 High-Low tier list. I'm your host, Adam Moriarty Isles, and as always, be sure to check out our other content at mobalytics.gg or even on this channel.